Wow. Well, thank you, Dean Holland. That was incredible. I mean, how much of it was true? It was very welcoming remarks. I really appreciate it. And it's amazing to be here, I can tell you. This is just to see everyone who's getting ready to graduate. This is fabulous, I'm telling you. I only did it once, so I didn't get as far as some of you did. But I'm honored, really, to address all of you today. I mean, members of the faculty, the families, friends, neighbors, and you, the graduates of this amazing Bienen School of Music. And I'd like to offer, again, my heartfelt congratulations to all of you. I imagine that some of you already know what you're going to do next. More school maybe, or a job, or something like that. But for the rest, this moment can seem the prelude to a deep dive into the abyss. Now, it certainly did for me. And I can tell you that we all need help as we contemplate that giant black hole. And this is especially true because as long as I've been on this planet, and I think it was true, I consider myself to be a part of 21st century American music. The arts in American public life are still widely regarded as merely a charming appetizer that has little to teach us about the critical issues of our time. So for the next few minutes, I want to make special reference to crucial lessons to be drawn from the arts, and in particular the art of music, with which I've been most centrally involved for over 50 years now. And along the way, I want to provide you with some small strategies for what to do. First, one thing we eventually learn is that the amazing achievements such as yours being celebrated today emerge as the product of hard work, insight, and dedication, but not just by you, dear graduates, but also by communities of practice, desire, and love. Communities of practice, desire, and love. And I've been part of one such community, as Dean Holland noted, for over 60 years, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, or the AACM, which was born in 1965 on Chicago's South Side, where I was also born and raised. This African-American experimental musicians collective is now known worldwide for its many innovations in the development of American experimental music. These are young black experimentalists came together to create in full-on collective resistance to a social, aesthetic, political, and cultural opposition that never sleeps, not even today, as we see every single day. A number of as it happens, and this is the interesting part, I like this part, a number of my generation of AACM friends and colleagues, Adegoke, Steve Colson, Iqua Colson, Saji Adebayo, Janice Lane Ewart, Earl Chico Freeman, went to this institution. So I'm particularly grateful to Dean Holland, who is a composer of superior gifts, as you know, for inviting this Chicago native to the Bienen School of Music. I don't think I've actually been to the Bienen School of Music before. It's very nice, but apparently you have great facilities here, but of course I know Evanston. And this campus is not far at all from the house where in the mid-1970s, the former AACM president, Douglas R. Ewart, and me, we were riding the CTA from the far south side each week to rehearse with the late, great saxophonist and composer Fred Anderson, a longtime Evanston resident and original AACM member with whom these other Northwestern students that I just talked about, with whom he taught them. They studied with him and performed. Anderson came to Chicago from Louisiana in one of the many waves of the Great Migration, the longest and largest internal migration in the history of the United States. You could call it an Occupy the North style improvisation of distributed intelligence pursued over half a century by ordinary working class African Americans. During this extended social improvisation, the risks of real-time action exemplified the composer John Cage's definition of experiment. An experimental action is one the outcome of which is not foreseen. And that is exactly what Steve Colson, Chico Freeman, and other African-American students did in May 1968 when they, along with other members of Northwestern's Black Student Organization, spearheaded what is now known, you can read about this, as the Bursar's Office Takeover. They presented a list of demands to the Northwestern University administration in response to discriminatory campus practices and policies, and to heighten the awareness of Black student experiences of racial insensitivity on the campus. This important historical event is now an indelible part of Northwestern's history, and in fact, 40 years later, for my book, which was mentioned by Dean Holland, The AACM, A Power Stronger Than Itself, The AACM in American Experimental Music, I interviewed these former Northwestern students who became AACM members, documenting their experiences. Well, now the AACM had its own demands, its own purposes, related to what we called making creative music, original music, a music that our generation and our forebears believed would actually set us free. I quote here, in other words, not a safe space. I quote here from the saxophonist Gene Easton, one of the AACM's earliest charter members, speaking at the very first organizational meeting before there actually was an AACM in May 1965. And how can I make this quote? Well, it turns out that the AACM audio taped all their meetings because they thought, well, this would be a cool thing. We actually have this. We don't have to take paper minutes. And no one thought of this as being a record that I would listen to 40 years later, listening on headphones with some of the same people that I was in a meeting with and saying, wait a minute, you can't say that. Oh, I'm not in the meeting. Anyway, Gene Easton is talking to the multitude, not the multitude, maybe 20 people, 30 people, not expecting any of this to happen. And in fact, I ended up writing an opera using these words without much alteration. He says, well, I think we're getting closer to an explanation of this term original music. Among some of us, it means something a little deeper than others. Original, in one sense, means something you write in the particular system that we're locked up with now in this society. We express ourselves in this system because it's what we learned. But as we learn more of other systems of music around the world, we're getting closer to the music our ancestors played and which we are denied the right to really stretch out in. And this term original means finding a complete new system that expresses us. We now find that there is expression on a much higher level than we had been led to believe, and we will be locked up in this system for the rest of our days unless we can get out of it through some means such as this. And here I often think about the words of the French philosopher Pierre Hadot for a clue to the ultimate goal of this kind of experimentalism, again a product of the Great Migration. Hadot said, "We are not dealing with the mere creation of a work of art. The goal is rather to transform ourselves." So far beyond seeking to advance our own careers as artists, the AACM became responsible for its own members, for each other. The AACM School of Music, which I studied at, founded in 1968, provided free instruction in music to people all ages, young people, but also people of my current age and older. People had to teach each other as a matter of survival. Now, a lot of the remarks I'm going to go forward with come from something that I was told by the AACM trumpeter Lester Bowie, and that the philosopher Arnold I. Davidson also shared with me. And this relates to you. Artists teach people how to live. So the lessons I took from composers like Muhal Richard Abrams, master teacher and AACM co-founder, Fred Anderson, and others, concern not only how to compose, but how to learn to think and how to live, knowing yourself, but also caring for yourself and others. Well, if you want to learn how to live, you can start by learning how to listen. And this should be easy for you. You're probably told this every day. Here, you got to listen, Musicians should actually be the best listeners because we're being told that every day, day in and out. Now, the historian Mark M. Smith tells us that the people most sensitive to the oral world in the Old South were slaves. For them, the ability to control sound and silence could mean freedom. At one end of the sound spectrum, there's Harriet Tubman, who learned from her father how to walk soundlessly through the woods. At the other, there was blind Tom Wiggins, the 19th century child prodigy, the virtuoso pianist and composer whose works became famous while he was black, blind, and enslaved. Sort of like Mozart, but black, blind, and enslaved. He had a repertoire of 5,000 pieces, of course all memorized, including his own compositions, which used tone clusters, noise, which recalled the sounds of bombs and battles nearly a half-century before the 20th century American musical avant-garde congratulated itself on this so-called discovery. Or maybe you've heard about the Mexican linguist Carlos Linkersdorf, who spent decades studying Toyolabal, a Mayan language spoken by the Toyolabal people of Chiapas. According to Lenkersdorf, the name of this people is a compound of abal, the word which is listened to and not spoken, and toyol, the right moment of listening. So in English you might say, she told me. The corresponding sentence in Toyolabal says, she told, I listened. So the crucial importance of listening to the identity of this ethnic group centrally implicates the we, or the nosotros in Spanish, in a process that has been actually called nosotredad or nosotrification. So what keeps us from realizing the power of nosotredad? Well, one thing could probably be a blockage of consciousness. I think that might even be the greatest obstacle, because I fear that the old-style diversity discourse leads us to a prosthetics of inclusion. You know, like when I got my knee replaced, it's still pretty clunky. Instead, you and I need to invent un nuevo nosotros, a new we, practiced by the widest variety of people in many variations around the world. In new music, the area I work in, this means that what we're embracing is the situation of the Creole, a way of maintaining creative depth, even with all its turbulence, a new complexity. That's a buzzword from like new music. A new complexity of experience in which we are truly responsible, not just to ourselves, but to each other, and not just for now, but forever. In order to express that you'll need three important tools: adaptability, communitarianism, and improvisation. In our real-world, everyday life improvisations, we're not making music, really, but we're drawing from the lessons taught by music to get along in the world and create new possibilities for ourselves, our communities, our nations, the world. And so here, success is less a question of individual freedom, but more of the assumption of personal and collective responsibility for the environment we are creating. This kind of improvisation becomes a critical practice, a space where discontinuity, disruption, and struggle become pathways to new experience. You know, a lot of the AACM's music was once denigrated, in the literal sense of that term, as noise when it first emerged. But then, according to historian John Cruz, characterizing black music as noise dates back to at least as far back as the mid-19th century, when US slave owners and overseers described slave soundings as savage, strange, incomprehensible, with no relation to history, memory, or intelligence. For Cruz, however, noises sound out of order, resistant to capture. Noise introduces uncertainty, and people bring the noise whenever change is in the offing. So come to think of it, you know, I'm one of those noisers. You know, people make a lot of noise. And the noisers, people like me, routinely overflow the banks of propriety, unleashing the possibility of difference, and with it, the subversive possibility of change. People hear our noise and say, wow, no one told me music could be like that. I wonder what else they haven't told me. Or they say, wow, that music is really different. And once they start down that road, their thoughts inevitably turn to what else might need to be different around here. So we're seeing that noise right now, all around the US and around the world in response to the situation in Gaza. The ugly recrudescence of a seemingly never-abating tide of anti-Semitism has also exposed the need to confront and combat a vast number of interrelated issues, many more than I can address here. But here I'd like to present a musical example of where I'm headed. The public health researcher Arlene Geronimus has identified the phenomenon of weathering as a continuous activation of physiological stress response to a systematic, worldwide, unrelenting anti-blackness. The image here is of a rock being eroded by continuous exposure to the elements. But the exposures that provoke this continuous fight or flight response can happen at any time, and the deleterious effects linger long after the experience is over. Premature aging, dysfunctions of the immune, cardiovascular, metabolic, and endocrine systems, and even damage to DNA and the brain. The resulting sensory alteration recalls one of ancient Greek culture's most terrifying myths, the fate of King Sisyphus, whom the gods punished by compelling him to push an enormous boulder up a hill only to see it roll down again, a task he was doomed to repeat endlessly throughout eternity. And this is where we get to that piece that Dean Holland was talking about, my orchestral work, Weathering, from last year, with its constant and unpredictable invocation of a thick, heavy sonority that I call the "not this again" chord, depicts this individual and communitarian weathering with its unreasonable demands for ersatz stoicism, with a small s, from oppressed people. So my music, my noise, my writing asks its hearers and readers, if we get what we want, what will it sound like? This question ultimately calls for new histories, new subjectivities, and new identities in music. But those who would suppress our speech and our music have also learned to bring the noise. This time as a means of obscuring truth and confusing well-meaning people who just can't figure out what is real throughout all the noise. Some among us are using this baleful world situation as a pretext to pursue the destruction of liberal education, whose object is the erasure of history, culture, and freedom. So this is a topic I'm pretty familiar with from firsthand experience as I address what I've called the cone of silence, draped over the work of Afro-diasporic composers with my new co-edited work, Composing While Black. Not to mention all those book banners who always seem to find a problem with books by women, LGBTQ+ people, and people of color. And you know they're not going to stop there. Your right to rock and rap is next, and classical music will not be exempt. And there are still more erasures in the offing unless we manage to kick the addiction to white supremacy, homophobia, and patriarchy. That's with its autoimmune response that now threatens the world. But even as those people are doing all that book banning, all those erasures, they're also admitting how much they fear your awesomeness as musicians. So I'm certain that, as was memorably expressed when Frederick Shevsky's set of piano variations on "The People United Will Never Be Defeated," the unstoppable combination of expressive awesomeness with the power of the multitude can turn back the bad faith policing of women's bodies, the militant suppression of trans identities. The history makers can turn back the history takers as we fight to keep our freedom and democracy real, to take back all the rights we've lost in just the past couple of years. So I'm leaving you with a concept that builds from a saying of the great John Lewis, who I met in 2018 when we both received honorary doctorates from Harvard University. Now, that was an honor as much as this one. Incredible honor, thank you. So, but meeting John Lewis, wow. And sitting next to the guy on the podium, come on, you know. Anyway, he told us, he exhorted us all to get, you know this phrase, to get into trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. So I want you all to get out there and make some noise, some good noise, some necessary noise, because good trouble and good noise are really the same thing, the forceful assertion of alternatives in the face of oppression. So I thank all of you again for this honor, and I hope that you can all join me in making that good noise. Thank you.